Chaos Dwarfs are one of the strongest factions in the game, and their roster is a major part of that. So how about we give them a bunch more units like sawed-off shotguns, flamethrowers and tanks with Hashut's gunpowder units. The first unit is actually a mount. We have the Dravzar Gron, which is an extremely powerful artillery unit. Melee-wise, you have basically nothing, but with 500 range, you can keep them well back, no problem. The missile damage here is honestly crazy, with massive barrages dealing huge amounts of explosive, armor-piercing damage, and you even get some vortexes after impact. With so much ammo, you'll have no problem sitting this guy at the back and raining fire onto the biggest clumps that you can. For the Infernal Castellans, they now have 3 new mounts. The Iron Demon is literally just the same as the vanilla unit. The Draz Garaz Kul is another artillery tank with massive range and essentially no use in melee. Damage is high with lots of shots per volley and explosive power, but not the most armor piercing. Still, clumps of infantry are the way to go for the most value, and to make the most of a not insignificant amount of bonus versus infantry. And the Shaba Duvaz Kul. This drops some range from the previous mount to gain a lot more armor piercing damage. This is much better suited to large single entities, both to make the most of that massive anti-large bonus, but also because no infantry could ever hope to stand up to something dealing quite so much damage. And for those keeping score, that's flaming, magical, armor piercing, armor sundering, anti-large damage. And for the Demon Smith, we have the Zar Gron. This is pretty much a weaker version of the Sorcerer Prophet mount with similar damage, but just 1 missile per barrage. Still fantastic versus infantry with all that explosive area damage. Moving over to the ranged infantry, and first up we have the sawed-off shotgun Chaos Dwarf Gunners. These are a very short range missile infantry, and compared to blunderbusses, they are dropping all melee stats to gain a little bit more speed and attack in melee. They are still pretty weak versus anything that can fight back, but of course their true power is still their missiles. It's huge scattershot barrages dealing low but majority armor piercing damage, so it adds up quickly if you can hit enemies in the meat. You'll also need to worry about getting a safe firing angle because the spread here is literally insane, and attempting to shoot over your own units will undoubtedly result in a lot of friendly fire. Shotgun Chaos Dwarf Gunners drop some of that melee power to gain a lot more range and missile damage. We're still talking scattershot barrages, but they're a little bit more focused and deal a healthy amount of armor piercing damage. I'd still avoid shooting over the heads of your allies and keep looking for safer firing angles, but they can deal slightly more accurate damage from a longer range, so they're a safer, easier way to blow enemies to pieces. Whilst the Magma Spewers are described as a flamethrower unit, they're honestly more like rocket launchers. They explode fire wherever they land. You can also ignore the anti-large bonus, as these will almost always do better versus infantry due to their spread when firing and explosive area damage. They tear even high armor shielded infantry to pieces, all while setting them on fire and tanking their leadership. Aim for the biggest clump that you can and try to avoid hitting your own troops, since they're not the most accurate. Next up, the Repeaters Infernal Gunners. Firstly, as infernal units, they have similar melee stats to Fireglaves, so can take care of themselves no problem should the occasion call for it. From a range, they have medium range, high armor piercing missiles with fairly hefty barrages. They're pretty strong versus both infantry and monsters, but with a flatter firing arc, larger targets will be a lot easier to hit from a safe distance, so it really is up to you on what you're going against. I apologise, there's going to be hammering in the background of this. They're building next door, and it's literally just constant. These Sniper Infernal Gunners obviously have a very large range for infantry, and within this they deal fairly high armor piercing damage imbued with the ability to reduce the efficacy of enemy shield. Again, they can deal great damage to infantry and large targets, but with their longer range does come a slightly more favourable firing arc, so you can shoot at basically anything you like that falls within their range. Just pick whatever the biggest threat is and set them sniping. The Ashstorm Makers are pretty similar to the Magma Spewers, but with less impact but more explosive damage. However, their real power isn't on the unit card, and that's their ability to inflict blinded, which tanks their target's attack, defense, missile block, and speed. They're more of a support missile unit to soften up enemies rather than something to deal a ton of damage, so aim at a big clump of units, fighting your troops, and pray you don't get too much friendly fire. They won't blind allies, but they will still deal some damage, so just do your best. The Flame Belchers are more your traditional flamethrowers, and that means they're extremely devastating versus clumps, and even without a little armor piercing emoji, they can rip and tear through the toughest defenses with ease. Of course, they also have a fairly flat firing arc, so beware of friendly fire, otherwise they're a total blast and a terror to any and all enemy infantry. Obsidian Shards are the Trollhammer torpedoes to the Flame Belchers Iron Drakes, and what I mean by this is that these guys tear large targets to shreds, no problem. They may be a little bugged with their missiles being almost invisible, but they deal a tremendous amount of armor piercing damage and will obliterate larger targets in moments. Add on to that their suppression to slow their targets, and once you land a hit, it's already over. The Etal Hazkala are a very powerful hybrid weapons unit with extremely powerful melee stats along with medium range missiles. Their missile power is okay, but not the most armor piercing, so they're definitely going to want to head into melee if you want them to focus on damage. See these more of an alternative front line that can shoot enemies as they approach before throwing down in melee once they get too close. The Kal Haskala are a bit more defensive focused in melee and drop a lot of range and armor, but their missiles are a lot more armor piercing. They can still be used the same as a frontlines unit that can chip away with a few barrages before enemies get too close. Just be aware they'll deal less damage in melee, so we'll need some help to take down tougher threats. Kicking off the artillery and war machines, we have a truly terrifying, devastating unit, the Hobgoblin Bolt Thrower. It's basically the same as the Greenskin Bolt Thrower, but has a little bit more armor. Still, you can use it the same to focus down larger targets to get some early artillery power into your armies. Jumping ahead just a little bit in the tech tree with the Draz Garakaz, which is essentially a howitzer. This thing deals massive damage across a staggering range, best suited for taking on larger targets, despite what the explosive damage would have you believe. It is shockingly accurate, and with such a huge bonus versus large, it will cut through large targets in moments. This, combined with the range and firing arc, makes it a perfect unit for sitting at the back and raining pain onto whatever catches your eye. The Draz Garaki drops a chunk of range and quite a lot of damage per projectile to give you a whole lot more of them. It's much less accurate, but when you're shooting at infantry, it hardly matters. It deals fantastic area damage capable of picking infantry apart in moments, and it can still do this from very far away with a nice curved firing arc. Just watch out for your own units, and you should be golden. The Shaba Dugvaz is the first true tank unit with cannons that may as well be laser beams for how flat the firing arc is. They deal huge damage, effective versus both infantry and large targets, so it all depends on what you're up against and what angle you are shooting from. To hit infantry, you'll need to get on the flanks, otherwise you will literally be shooting through your own troops, so be prepared to plan ahead with that slow speed. In melee, it's hard to kill but fairly weak with low melee stats and damage. Keep it shooting for the most value and try to keep your distance from anything that can put up a fight. The Bolg Zagron has the exact same melee stats but drops a lot of missile power. However, this is due to it only being a single projectile best suited to large single entities to make the most of that impact damage. It has a ridiculous range, so can do all of this from literally the other end of the map, no problem. And if enemies come to take it down, it can deploy a unit of gunners to keep itself safe. The Zargron is just the same as the Demon Smith mount, so strong area damage best used versus infantry. The Drazgron is another tank unit, this time with two types of weaponry. You have the main cannon similar to the Shaba, and some explosive area damage similar to the Zargron. This adds up to a unit that is devastating versus infantry, but very reliant on you having a clean angle to fire from. Flanks are the best, but with that slow speed it can be a challenge to pull off safely, so just aim for the biggest clumps that you can and send a prayer to the Almighty that you don't hit your own guys. The Gunner's Iron Demon is basically a war wagon with multiple carriages full of Chaos Dwarfs with blunderbusses and grenades. They tear infantry to shreds and can keep out of harm's way decently enough with their moderate speed. Keep them out of melee at all costs as they cannot do anything, and be sure to angle them correctly to ensure everyone can get off shots no problem. The Infernal Gunner's Iron Demon is more or less the same unit but with way more missile power. Still great versus infantry, but can do good versus monsters. Just keep them out of melee and shooting at something and they will rack up tons of value in no time. The Magmalob's Iron Engine is more of that delightful area damage similar to units like the Zargron, but this time on a train. Little lighter weight, but still tons of area damage best used versus a clump. The Flames of Hashut Iron Engine is a bunch of long-range flamethrowers on the back of a train, and honestly that's such a badass sentence that I feel I need to take a second. Okay. The damage here is also astronomical and can evaporate the toughest infantry in moments. You do need a good angle to fire from, and with the slower speed that can be a challenge, but if you can get off a single broadside barrage, basically nothing is going to come out of it without being extremely scathed. Honestly, even large targets are fair game, the damage here is just that high. As long as you can set up to fire, you're going to hurt whatever you end up hitting. The Demolisher Rocket's Iron Engine is quite similar to the Bolg Zargron in terms of high damage missiles best suited for larger targets. You're dealing with a massive range and excellent accuracy, so sit this thing at the back picking off massive key targets, and you can't go wrong. The Starquake Iron Engine may have some visual bugs that make their missiles disappear, but the damage cannot be understated. I know it seems low on the stat card, but this thing shreds through heavily armoured infantry like butter. It obliterates clumps, so aim it to the biggest one you can find, and pray it doesn't hit your own guys. And lastly, Hashut's Gaze Iron Engine has a weapon that is most similar to the tank cannon from the Shaba. We're talking massive armor-piercing missile power best used versus long lines of infantry, or tanky single entities. Angle of fire is everything here, so don't be afraid to maneuver somewhere good before you get shooting. And finally we have some Regiments of Renown. The Draz Haraz Hunters are a snipers unit. They gain improvements to every single stat, but particularly their melee power, making them into a very tanky hybrid weapons unit. The Draz Haraz Repeaters are a repeaters unit, and similar story to the Hunters. Lots of improvements making them very tanky in melee, but these lads lose a lot of missile power in the process. The Draft Zargron is a Zargron unit and gains more missiles per barrage, just like the Sorcerer Prophet mounts. The Drazul Haraz has a bunch of carriages holding one of each of the weapons from the other Iron Engine units. Nearly impossible to target correctly, but shoots lots of stuff at once, so you can't complain. And the Vengrin Uva Drath Iron Engine. This is an exceedingly slow-firing artillery piece that does an inordinate amount of area damage across a galactic range with extremely limited ammo. It basically launches Doom rockets complete with its own PC-burning mushroom cloud. Aim it at the biggest clumps possible away from your own troops, and pray you don't miss or crash your PC. You technically get 3 shots but must endure a 3-minute reload after each one, so choose your targets extremely carefully. Now to wrap up with a mod review, roster mods are usually a bit hit and miss for me since there's only really so many ways you can build a unit. So when I saw that the mod only added ranged infantry and war machines, I was a little bit worried there'd be a lot of repetition, but I'm very glad to be wrong. The unit variety here really is impressive. Each unit performs a very particular job in a very particular way, and whilst many of them attack the same sorts of targets, very few of them do it the same way or from the same distance. If I was playing a Chaos Dwarfs campaign, I could very easily see myself making use of basically everything here at some point or another because of just how well they fit their specific niche. From a visual standpoint, everything looks incredible, and with the exception of a couple of buggy animations here and there, they fit right into the roster, no problem. Performance-wise, they are obviously all incredible and undoubtedly some of the most powerful units on a already very powerful roster. You could argue that they're too strong, but honestly the Chaos Dwarves are already broken, so I really think it hardly matters. So whether you were looking to play as the Chaos Dwarves and want to spice up your battles, or just want to get a taste of Total War 40k before that closed beta, this is an excellent mod that I highly recommend. But if you're instead looking for a mod to transform Warhammer 3 from a strategy game to a roguelite, then check out this video to see just that.